So, as we all know by now, the Brexiteers love the World Trade Organization, despite knowing nothing about it or how it works. And recently, if the comments of the guy who actually is the head of the World Trade Organization is to go by, Brexiteers should be wetting themselves. But the problem is they're not, because, as I've said from the very beginning, Brexit is not about facts or the reality. It's about a political notion of sovereignty which doesn't really exist, and the basic denying of how the world actually works today. And we're going to go through this because there was a guy called Peter Lilley who wrote a piece in the Times about this, and there has been a response to this from politics.co.uk. I'll leave a link to it down below. And this was by a guy called, it might be a girl, hold on. Yeah, Professor Elan Winters, who is the Director of UK Trade Policy Observatory and a Professor of Economics at the University of Sussex Business School. So, I think she knows about the World Trade Organization. So, earlier this month, Peter Lilley, a former UK Trade and Industry Secretary, published an article in the Times entitled, "Even a no-deal Brexit is better than the status quo. This is just not true, and for reasons that Lilley ought to understand. I do not want to pick on him particularly. Other advocates of WTO terms make similar claims, if a little less direct and expressed. But since we're here that the European Reform Group is preparing a paper in which WTO terms will be advanced as an acceptable option, it seems the kindest to save them some effort by clearing up the main misapprehensions now. It is often argued that because the EU trade conducted under WTO terms is growing faster than trade between members, the WTO must somehow offer better terms. Colleagues in UK TPO, who have already shown that this is a total fallacy, this leaves me free here to deal with the rules themselves." And there's a link to that in the article where you can go read that. So I would go and read that yourself, because this is another claim Brexiteers have made, that the world is somehow the better option to deal with, not the European Union. Go read that article. Again, like I say, it's only experts' opinion showing that, this is the reality of the case, not what the Brexiteers say. So, anyway, it begins. Lilley wrote, "WTO terms are designed to provide a safety net ensuring that all members can trade without discrimination. The EU will have to offer us the most favoured nation terms. This is its other major trading partners enjoy." However, that's not true. Again, we've been over that. Even I can tell you that's not true. So, anyway, we continue with the analysis. So the WTO's most favoured nation obligation does indeed avoid the worst discrimination. But in fact, most EU trading partners receive better than that. Nearly 70 countries nearly 70 countries avoid almost all tariffs because they have a free trade agreement with the EU. Lower and middle income countries avoid most of them via the EU development orientation preferences. Some of the FTAs go a little bit further than tariffs to cover areas like services, trade, and mutual recognition and testing procedures. The EU is close to completing several future trade deals, for instance, with Japan and Vietnam. The European Commission states that only 24 countries will then face WTO terms. Even among Even among those, some are trying to be negotiating better terms, including Australia. So if Australia is currently trading with the European Union on WTO terms, and remember, Brexiteers think that WTO terms are amazing, why is Australia trying to negotiate a better deal than the WTO terms? Since the WTO came into being, 243 new free trade agreements have come into operation. Every country has at least one. None of this suggests that the WTO terms are viewed generally as a satisfactory option. This is from Lilley's article. Non-tariff barriers add just 0.1% according to the Swiss. And the response to that is, the trouble with this argument is that the Swiss align themselves almost perfectly with the EU. Every other estimate of EU non-tariff barriers is far higher, often exceeding 20%. And even though the UK is likely to avoid some barriers, others, for example, having to submit documents and getting certification that you meet EU regulations, will certainly apply. Again, from the main source, the non-tariff barriers are dwarfed by the 15% boost to our exporters' competitiveness from the movement of the pound since the referendum. So the response to this was, devaluation may help exporters and may be more competitive abroad, but it reinforces the price increasing effects of tariffs and other barriers that the UK will have to levy on imports from the EU. So in reality, it further reduces ordinary people's real incomes and interest and increases British costs of production. Devaluation is no anecdote to WTO terms. This is from obviously the one they're replying to. So applying EU tariffs to our imports from Europe would yield £13 billion. The response is, tariffs may help the government's coffers, but there are taxes on those people and firms in the UK who consume imports. They are monetary already. Tariffs distort the UK economy and will reduce welfare, not the opposite. Lilley, who negotiated the Uganda round tariff cuts for the UK, used to believe this. It is not unclear why this has changed. So, again, this is another one. We would be free to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The response is, the trouble with these ideas is that the partnership does not exist. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership does. It accounts for almost 40% of world income compared to the EU's 22%. So tell me which one's better. And it is thousands of miles away, and does not remove all tariffs, and still would require the UK to adhere to certain rules, for example on digital trade. So without a trade deal, the UK Parliament will reject any withdrawal agreement offering the EU 40 billion that leaves Britain 40 billion better off. So the response to that is not better off, just less badly off. Trading on WTO terms will reduce the UK's income in the long run by far more than avoiding a one-off payment of 40 billion will increase it. Moreover, having conceded that at least implicitly that the 40 billion is a reflection of our future obligations to the EU, walking away from them will undermine any hope of cooperation in other dimensions. Security, flying rights and UK citizen status in the EU, for instance, would all be vulnerable to worsening conditions without a withdrawal agreement. Why is that so hard to understand to a lot of people? I don't understand why that's hard to understand for a lot of people. Anyway, so he continues. The unjustified Irish border backstop commitment disappears. HMRC says Britain will not require any infrastructure at the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland under any circumstances. Tariffs can be collected alongside VAT returns. So the response to that is, of course the backstop disappears, but so too might peace in Northern Ireland. Plenty of people, including implicitly the UK government, have given a pledge to maintain open borders. Accept free commerce is a part of this peace process. So that means putting a tax on things, suddenly that's no longer free trade. That doesn't mean that that border is open. So anyway, the original continues. So how we control import is in our hands. Lorries laden with fresh food will not be queuing for hours at Dover, since Dover sees no need for new physical checks. HMRC will avoid delays by waving lorries through. So Lilley's plan entails that we'd have no checks on meat products for food safety. Certainly EU inspects about 50% of poultry from non-EU sources. What checks for chemicals? What about checks for chemical safety? It is as if he thinks that the EU is such a fine place that we do not need to inspect what they send us. Waving lorries through hardly seems like taking back control. So this is Lilley's part. So if the French slow down Calais, the Dutch and Belgian ports want the business and they all offer a speedier service. The response to that is, the proposed system seems to involve moving the Channel Tunnel. This should not need saying, but no other port can supply the UK at the same speed and cost. This is true. Anyway, this is from Lilley's original from the Times. The hostile non-cooperation envisaged by Remainers would not only be impractical, but typically illegal. It controverts the EU's constitution, which requires it to establish an area of good neighbourliness with neighbouring countries. The WTO treaty, which forbids discrimination against trading partners, we won't be a trading partner, and the new trade facilitation treaty, which commits members to facilitate trade, will not obstruct it. And the response is simply this, and I'm laughing already. This paragraph is nonsensical. Neighbourliness is perfectly compatible with having tariffs and inspectors at the border. It does not entail the EU abiding responsibility for its own safety and customs duty. Non-discrimination works the opposite way from what Lilley suggests. The EU is obliged by the WTO to treat the UK as it treats others, a third country status. That is what many more frictions than the UK faces at present as a member of the EU. The Trade Facilitation Agreement is often cited by other advocates of WTO terms, for example, Owen Paterson. However, as Patrick Minford of the Brexit-backing Economies for Free Trade and I have agreed in private correspondence, developed countries currently practices are already compatible with it. So if the EU will treat imports from the UK as it currently treats those from Canada, the Canadian government's view of its treatment is as follows. You will need to deal with a lot of documents when exporting goods to the EU market. And to make exporting easier, you might wish to use freight forwards and customs brokers. And from here, Lilley just gets carried away. Portraying leaving the EU as costly demonstrates that membership has no significant benefits. Doing so parallels the Berlin Wall. The British people will never cave in before such threats. So this is a bit of a catch-22. If we point out the costs, there are none. But if we do point them out, there are none. The WTO is not useless. Its rules are an essential part of the architecture for a peaceful and prosperous world, but they are the lowest common denominator. Rules for denominator rules for trading between 164 separate and sometimes mutually hostile states, not the rules for deeply integrated, highly cooperative and sophisticated allies. A no deal will not destroy all UK-EU trade or sink the UK economy beneath the waves, but it will involve a serious and permanent loss of income. Those who believe the sacrifice is worth it for political reasons should be open about it, and they should be prepared to suffer their share of the losses. And that's where we're getting now. The WTO is not this amazing thing, and again, I'll leave this link to the article down below so you can read it yourself. But as it goes through, there is not one reasonable argument to say that we should just replace our EU membership and all the benefits that come with it, the trade agreements especially, are just not we're not able to replicate them. Full stop. And as was here in it brings up Australia. If the WTO terms, again, Australia trades with the EU under WTO terms, why then is Australia trying to negotiate better terms to trade with the EU? If WTO terms, again, are so good, why then are Japan and Vietnam negotiating with the EU to get better terms than they do now under WTO terms? And we're going to be stuck, the only country in the world, trading on WTO terms. By the way, no one has accepted our schedule yet for the WTO terms, because all we've done is replicated the EU ones, which is ridiculous because we don't make olive oil. Well, we don't grow olives in this country, so there is no tax on. There are problems about this. And other countries will take us to the World Trade Organization court, and we will then have to abide by that ruling. So the idea that the WTO terms are somehow this place where sovereign countries go and do these amazing things is not, because there is a court, just like there is a court in the European Union, which helps mediate all these disputes. But, there you go.